The room is silent except for the sound of her breathing. Short, shallow, like she's trying not to make a sound at all. Outside, you can hear them, voices in the street, laughter, the distant clatter of wine cups against stone. It's her wedding night. She should be happy. Everyone keeps telling her she should be happy. But here, in this small chamber lit by a single oil lamp, with shadows dancing across walls painted with scenes of gods and heroes, she's terrified. And she's not alone in that terror. Because tonight, like every wedding night in ancient Rome, there's something waiting for her. Something the poets won't write about. Something the historians will carefully avoid mentioning in their grand accounts of Roman virtue and family values. You see, when we think about ancient Rome, we think about the Colosseum, right? The gladiators, the emperors, maybe Julius Caesar getting stabbed 23 times by his so-called friends. We think about roads and aqueducts and Latin phrases we learned in high school. But we don't think about this. We don't think about the young girls, some of them barely 13 or 14 years old, lying in darkened rooms on their wedding nights, waiting for something they've been told is their duty but that fills them with a kind of dread they don't even have words for. Tonight, we're going to talk about that. About the ritual Rome tried to hide. The night Roman brides feared most. And I need to warn you right now, this isn't going to be one of those sanitized history lessons where everyone wears togas and speaks in dignified tones about the glory of the Republic. This is going to be raw. This is going to be uncomfortable. Because the truth is uncomfortable. And the truth is this. Rome built an empire on the backs of its women, and it started on their wedding nights. Let me take you back. Not to the Rome of marble statues and triumphant arches, that's the Rome they wanted you to see. I'm taking you to the Rome behind closed doors. The Rome of whispered conversations between mothers and daughters. The Rome of rituals that sound almost innocent when you first hear about them but that reveal something much darker when you look closer. Imagine you're a girl in Rome, around the year 100 AD. Let's call you Lucia. It's not your real name. We'll never know your real name because history didn't bother recording the names of girls like you. But Lucia will do. You're 14 years old. You've spent your whole life in your father's house, learning how to spin wool, how to manage slaves, how to keep your eyes down when men are talking. Your mother has taught you the prayers to Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Your older sisters have shown you how to arrange your hair in the 6 braids required of respectable women. You've been a good daughter. Obedient. Quiet, exactly what a Roman girl should be. And now your father has found you a husband. You don't know him. You've seen him maybe twice. Once when he came to discuss the marriage contract with your father, and once at the betrothal ceremony where he placed an iron ring on your finger. He's 32 years old. That's not unusual. Roman men typically married late, after they'd established their careers, made some money, bought some property. Women married young, very young. The law said 12 was old enough, though some families waited until 13 or 14 to be safe. You're one of the lucky ones, your mother keeps telling you. Your husband-to-be is from a good family. He's not unkind looking. He has all his teeth. He's not some ancient widower looking for his 4th wife. You should be grateful. And you are grateful. You think you are. But there's this feeling in your stomach, this tight knot that won't go away no matter how many times you recite the prayers your mother taught you. The wedding day arrives. It's been planned for months. They've consulted the augurs to find an auspicious date. Can't get married during certain months because the gods won't smile on it. June is best. Named after Juno, goddess of marriage. Your mother has been up since before dawn, directing the slaves, making sure everything is perfect. You've been bathed in special water, anointed with oils, dressed in a white tunic held together by a special knot, the knot of Hercules. Your hair has been arranged in the 6 braids, parted with a spear point to symbolize, well, no one really explains what it symbolizes. Just tradition. Ancient tradition. The kind you don't question. They've put a flame-colored veil over your face. You can barely see through it. Everything is a blur of orange and red. Like looking at the world through fire. The ceremony happens at your father's house. Friends and family crowded into the atrium. The ritual words are spoken. Words so old that half the people there don't even know what they mean anymore. You say the traditional phrase that every Roman bride says, Ubi tu Gaius, ego Gaia. Where you are Gaius, I am Gaia. It's a formula. Your husband's name isn't even Gaius, but that's what you say. That's what every bride says. It means you're his now. His household, his gods, his authority. The ceremony includes a sacrifice, a pig, its throat cut cleanly, blood collecting in a bronze bowl. The haruspeks examines the entrails, nods his approval. The gods are pleased. Everything is as it should be. There's a feast. Wine flows. People eat and laugh and make jokes that you don't quite understand but that make your new husband's friends roar with laughter. Your mother pulls you aside at one point and whispers something about your duty, about pleasing your husband, about remembering what she taught you. But she looks sad when she says it. There are tears in her eyes, and you don't know if they're tears of joy or something else. Now this is where it gets interesting. Because as evening falls, there's another ritual. One that everyone's been waiting for. The deductio. The procession. They're going to take you from your father's house to your husband's house, and they're going to make a whole performance of it. They light torches made from hawthorn. Has to be hawthorn, nothing else will do. 5 torches carried by 5 boys whose parents are still alive. Lucky boys, they call them. Boys untouched by death. The musicians start playing. Flutes and drums, creating a noise that's supposed to be festive but that sounds almost frantic to your ears. And then they come for you. Your husband's friends, young men full of wine and excitement, they grab you. You knew this was coming. Your mother warned you about this part. But knowing about it and experiencing it are two very different things. They pull you away from your mother. She's supposed to resist. It's part of the ritual. She's supposed to hold on to you and cry out, and the men are supposed to overcome her resistance and take you anyway. It's meant to symbolize the rape of the Sabine women, that foundational myth of Rome where Romulus and his men, lacking wives, invited the neighboring Sabines to a festival and then just took their women. Grabbed them, carried them off. And Rome loves this story. They paint it on walls, carve it into temples, hold it up as this romantic origin tale. The rape of the Sabine women. They say rape, but they mean it in the old sense, the taking, the seizing. But here's the thing about language and euphemism. Sometimes what we call something and what it actually is are two very different things. So they pull you from your mother's arms. The men are laughing. The women watching from doorways have these strange expressions on their faces, something between sympathy and resignation. And you're carried through the streets of Rome in this wild procession. Torches blazing, music blaring, people singing obscene songs, fertility songs, they call them, but they're really just crude jokes about what's going to happen to you tonight. Your husband walks ahead, he's not allowed to look back. Tradition. You're carried through the streets, and at intervals, people throw nuts. Walnuts, mostly, a symbol of fertility, of leaving behind childish things. There's a child's heart in your chest that's screaming, but you're not a child anymore. Rome says you're a woman now. Your body says you're a woman now. The law says you're a woman now. So that's what you must be. They reach your new home. Your husband's home. And here's another ritual. They lift you over the threshold. You're not allowed to trip. Not allowed to touch the threshold with your feet. Bad luck. Terrible omen. So they lift you. These hands of strangers, really, because you barely know these people, and they carry you over into your new life. Inside, there's more ceremony. You're given fire and water, the basic elements of life. You're accepting this house as your house now. These gods as your gods. This man is your master. Because that's what a husband is under Roman law. Not a partner, not an equal, a master. The legal term is paterfamilias. Father of the family, and his power over you is absolute. It's called patria potestas, the power of the father. He can punish you, sell you. In the old days, he could even kill you if you dishonored him, though by the time of the empire that's become rare. But the legal right still exists, hovering in the background like a thread no one has to voice out loud. The guests eventually leave. The torches burn down. The musicians pack up their instruments. The laughter fades. And then it's just the two of you. You and this man you barely know. In a room prepared for this moment. The bed has been blessed by a married woman. Someone whose first marriage is still intact, because those are the ones who bring good luck. The pronuba, they call her. The one who presided over the bedding. She's arranged everything just so. She's said the prayers. And now she's gone too. You're alone with him. You know what's supposed to happen next. Sort of. Your mother tried to explain. Your older sister hinted at things. The slaves probably told you more than they should have, in giggles and whispers when the mistress wasn't listening. But knowing what's supposed to happen and being prepared for it are, again, very different things. And here's what we need to talk about. Here's what Rome didn't want to talk about but that we need to face head on. Under Roman law, you cannot refuse your husband. Cannot say no. The concept doesn't even really exist within marriage. There's no word for marital rape in Latin because the idea is absurd to them. How can a man rape his own wife? She's his property. Well, not technically property. Roman law makes some distinctions there. But she's under his authority. His manus. His hand. Everything about her belongs to him. Her body, any property she might have owned, even her children will be legally his, not hers. So when he approaches you on this night, this first night, you have no right to refuse. No legal protection. No cultural expectation that he should care about your fear or your pain or your consent. Because consent isn't a factor. You're married now. You consented when you said the wedding vows. Everything after that is just his right. Now, here's what the Roman philosophers and poets want you to believe about all this. They want you to believe it was fine. They write about the noble Roman matron, the Univira, the woman of one man. They praise her chastity, her devotion, her willingness to serve her husband and bear his children. They create this image of the Roman marriage as a partnership built on mutual respect and affection. And sure, some marriages probably were like that. Some couples probably did develop genuine love and respect for each other. Human beings are capable of finding connection even in the most rigid and oppressive systems. But the system itself, the legal and cultural framework, was not built on partnership. It was built on power. Male power, absolute and unquestioned, and it started on the wedding night. Let me tell you about the ritual they don't talk about in the history books. The ritual that existed in the shadows of all those public ceremonies and blessings. It's called the jus primae noctis in some later medieval contexts, but in Rome, it didn't even have a special name because it was just understood. Expected. The rite of the first night. But in Rome, it was more than just a rite. It was a ritual deflowering, witnessed and validated by the community. Wait, you might be thinking. Witnessed. Let me explain. In some traditional Roman families, especially in the earlier periods, the marriage wasn't considered complete until it was consummated. And they needed proof. So the sheets, the bed linens from the wedding night, would be examined in the morning. Checked for blood. The blood of virginity broken. If there was blood, rejoicing. The marriage was valid. The bride had been a virgin, as required. Her family's honor was intact. If there was no blood, well, that could mean trouble. Maybe the bride hadn't been a virgin after all. Maybe the marriage could be annulled. Maybe her father would be accused of fraud, passing off damaged goods. Never mind that not every virgin bleeds the first time. Never mind that there could be a dozen innocent explanations. The cultural expectation was blood, proof, evidence, and the pressure of that expectation was crushing. But there's another layer to this. Another ritual that's even darker. In some households, particularly in the oldest families who clung to the most ancient traditions, there was the tradition of the pronuba actually staying in the room. Not participating, exactly, but present. To ensure the marriage was properly consummated. To guide the bride through what she was supposed to do. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being a 14-year-old girl, terrified out of your mind, and having some older woman, a stranger, essentially, standing there in the shadows, watching, occasionally offering instructions like this as some kind of craft to be learned? But it was a craft to be learned, according to Rome. The craft of being a wife. The craft of pleasing your husband. The craft of enduring what needed to be endured so that Rome could have its legitimate heirs and its unbroken family lines. And no one asked if it hurt. Well, they knew it hurt. There are medical texts from the period that talk quite clinically about the pain of first intercourse for young girls. Cyranus of Ephesus, a Greek physician working in Rome, wrote about it. He recommended that husbands be gentle, that they give their young brides time to adjust. But recommendation isn't requirement, and cultural expectation often overrode medical advice. The cultural expectation was that the husband would take what was his. That the bride would submit. That pain was part of the process. Part of becoming a woman. part of the sacrifice women made for the continuation of the family, the clan, the state. And here's something that's going to make you uncomfortable. Rome celebrated this. They turned it into poetry. Catullus, one of Rome's most famous poets, wrote wedding poems, epithalamia, they're called. Beautiful verses meant to be sung at weddings. And they're full of references to the wedding night, to the bride's fear and the groom's eagerness, to the battle of the marriage bed. They use military metaphors, conquest metaphors. The groom is a soldier taking his prize. The bride is the city to be besieged and entered. And everyone at the wedding would laugh and cheer and find this all very charming. Very romantic, even, because that's what they'd been taught romance was. Male desire and female submission. Male action and female passivity. The penetrator and the penetrated. And which one you were was determined entirely by your sex and your social status. Roman men penetrated. Women, slaves, and boys were penetrated. That's how they understood the sexual hierarchy. It wasn't about love or mutual pleasure. It was about power and social order. And the wedding night was where young girls learned their place in that order. Now, you might be wondering, didn't anyone object to this? Didn't anyone think this was wrong? And the answer is, complicated. There were Romans who advocated for kinder treatment of wives. Pliny the Younger, for instance, wrote beautiful letters about his wife, expressing genuine affection and respect. Musonius Rufus, a Stoic philosopher, argued that husbands and wives should be equal partners and that sexual fidelity should apply to men as well as women, a radical idea in Rome, where men were expected to have affairs while wives were expected to remain chaste. So there were voices of dissent, voices pushing for something better, but they were voices crying out against the entire weight of Roman tradition and law. And tradition is heavy, law is heavy. When every institution in your society tells you that this is how things should be, when your religion, your government, your family, your community all agree that this is the natural order, it's almost impossible to imagine something different. The girls certainly couldn't imagine something different. They'd grown up watching their mothers, their aunts, their older sisters go through the same thing. They'd grown up being prepared for this moment their entire lives. Every lesson about being quiet, being obedient, being modest, it was all preparation for the wedding night and everything that came after. Let's go back to Lucia for a moment. Our fictional girl who represents so many real girls whose names we'll never know. It's the morning after her wedding night. She's lying in bed, and her body hurts in ways she didn't know it could hurt. The pronuba came in earlier, examined the sheets, smiled with satisfaction, and took them away to show the family. Proof. Everything as it should be. Her husband is already up, already gone. He has business to attend to. Life goes on. Her life as a wife has begun. And here's what she has to look forward to. She's expected to produce children. As many as possible. That's her primary function now. Sons, preferably, to carry on her husband's name and inherit his property. But daughters too, because daughters can be married off to form useful alliances with other families. Pregnancy in Rome is dangerous. Very dangerous. There are no antibiotics, no sterile surgical techniques, no blood transfusions. If something goes wrong during childbirth, you probably die. The maternal mortality rate is staggering by modern standards. Some estimates suggest that as many as 1 in 4 women died from pregnancy-related complications. But there's no choice. You keep having children because that's your purpose. Your duty to your family and to Rome. And when you're not pregnant, you're managing the household. Managing the slaves. And make no mistake, there are slaves in this household, because any Roman family of decent status has slaves. You're supervising them, making sure the house runs smoothly, that your husband's clothes are clean and his meals are prepared and his guests are welcomed appropriately. You're also supposed to spin wool. Even wealthy women spin wool. It's a symbol of Roman feminine virtue. There are tombstones of noble Roman women that praise them for being beautiful, chaste, and excellent at wool working. Augustus, the first emperor, allegedly made his daughter and granddaughter spin wool to instill proper values in them. So you sit with your wool and your spindle, and you spin thread, and you think about your life. Do you think about that first night? Do you remember it, or do you try to forget it? We don't know. The women don't tell us. They left almost no personal writings. No diaries, no letters describing their inner lives. We have gravestone inscriptions written by their husbands and fathers. We have legal documents. We have the observations of male poets and philosophers. But we don't have the voices of the women themselves. And that silence is deafening. That silence is part of the ritual too, in a way. The silence imposed on women about their own experiences. The expectation that they would endure, and serve, and never complain. Never speak of the pain or the fear or the violation of that first night and all the nights that followed. But sometimes, very rarely, we get glimpses. We get fragments. There's a poem by Sulpicia, one of the very few female Roman poets whose work survived. She writes about love and desire, but her poems are tinged with a kind of melancholy. A sadness beneath the surface. And you wonder what she's not saying. What she can't say. There are medical texts that talk about women's health problems, and reading between the lines, you can see the toll that constant pregnancy and childbirth took on women's bodies. Fistulas, prolapsed uteruses, infections, chronic pain. The physicians describe these conditions clinically, but they never quite connect them to the broader system that created them. They never say, maybe if we didn't marry girls off at 13 and expect them to have baby after baby until their bodies gave out, they'd be healthier. That thought doesn't seem to occur to them. Or if it does, they don't write it down. There are also legal cases, fragments of court proceedings, where women are mentioned. Usually as property in disputes between men. Sometimes as accusers in adultery cases, though it's usually the husband accusing the wife, not the other way around. And occasionally, very occasionally, there's a case of a woman trying to divorce her husband. Yes, divorce existed in Rome. It was actually fairly common by the late Republic and early Empire. But the reasons for divorce tell their own story. A man could divorce his wife for almost any reason. If she displeased him. If she failed to produce children. If she was suspected of adultery. If he just got tired of her and wanted to marry someone younger or richer. A woman could divorce her husband too, but it was much more complicated. She needed her father's permission if she was still under his authority. She'd lose access to her children, they legally belonged to the husband's family. She'd be socially stigmatized, especially if she was the one initiating the divorce. And she'd have to have a really good reason. Adultery on the husband's part wasn't good enough. Men were expected to have affairs. Cruelty might work, but she'd have to prove it, and who was going to believe her over him? So divorce existed in theory, but in practice, it was mostly a tool men used to get rid of unwanted wives. Another form of control, another way the system was rigged. And all of this, all of these laws, customs, expectations, they all traced back to that wedding night. To that first ritual violation that Rome dressed up in flowers and poetry and called sacred. The night that turned a girl into a wife. The night that taught her, in the most visceral way possible, what her place in Roman society would be. Now I want to talk about the religious dimension of this, because it's important. Rome was a deeply religious society, and they believed the gods sanctioned all of this. There were gods and goddesses who presided over every aspect of marriage. Juno Pronuba watched over the wedding ceremony. Venus granted sexual pleasure, though mostly to men, in their understanding. There were even minor deities assigned to different parts of the wedding night. Virginicus helped the bride remove her virgin's belt. Sabigus made her submit to her husband's embraces. Prema held her down. Read that again. There was a goddess whose function was to hold the bride down. They made a deity out of that. They took what was essentially a girl being forcibly held down and penetrated against her will, and they said, "This is holy. This is sanctioned by the gods. This is the natural order of things." And if you can make something religious, if you can make it sacred, it becomes almost impossible to criticize. Because now you're not just criticizing a social custom, you're criticizing the will of the gods. You're being impious, sacrilegious. And in Rome, that was dangerous territory. The Romans believed their empire existed because they had the favor of the gods. Pax Deorum, peace with the gods. And they maintained that peace through precise observation of ritual. Every word of every prayer had to be exactly right. Every sacrifice performed correctly. Any deviation could anger the gods and bring disaster. So when they performed the wedding rituals, they did them exactly as they'd always been done, because that's what the gods wanted. That's what kept Rome strong. And the girls getting married, their feelings about it were irrelevant to the equation. They were part of the ritual. Part of the sacrifice, in a way. Their bodies and their futures were being offered up to maintain the social order and please the gods. There's a particularly chilling ritual I haven't mentioned yet. Before the wedding, the bride would dedicate her childhood toys to the household gods, her dolls, her games, the things she played with as a girl. She'd place them on the household altar and say goodbye to childhood. It's meant to be a touching ceremony, a rite of passage, but think about what it means. She's being told, put away childish things. You're not a child anymore. Even though she is still a child by any reasonable standard. Even though her body is still developing. Even though her mind hasn't finished maturing. Rome says she's ready. Rome needs her to be ready. Because Rome needs soldiers, and soldiers come from somewhere, and that somewhere is the bodies of young girls who have no choice in the matter. And the thing is, the Romans weren't unusual in this. This was happening all over the ancient world. Greece did it, Persia did it, Egypt did it, India, China, the Germanic tribes, the Celts, everywhere you look, ancient societies married their girls off young to men who had absolute authority over them. Rome wasn't special in this regard. But Rome was special in how thoroughly they documented everything else while maintaining a careful silence about this. They left us thousands of documents, inscriptions, histories, poems, and legal texts. They told us what they ate for breakfast, how they voted in the Senate, the exact dimensions of their aqueducts. But the actual experience of being a young bride on her wedding night, that they left in shadow. We have to piece it together from fragments. From medical texts that weren't trying to tell us about human suffering but that reveal it anyway. From love poetry that's celebrating male desire but that accidentally shows us female fear. From tombstones praising dead wives who were obedient and never caused trouble, and we have to ask ourselves what kind of life produces that as a highest compliment. Let me tell you about one woman we do know a bit about. Her name was Tullia, and she was Cicero's daughter. Cicero, the great orator and statesman, loved his daughter dearly. He wrote letters about her, and through those letters we can trace her life. She was married at around 14, maybe even younger, to a man named Piso. That marriage ended, possibly in divorce or possibly because Piso died. Then she married Furius Crassipes. That marriage also ended in divorce. Then she married Dolabella, who was much younger, closer to her own age, actually. And that marriage seems to have been passionate but tumultuous. They divorced. She died shortly after, possibly from complications from childbirth. She was around 30 years old. 3 marriages, at least 2 divorces, multiple pregnancies. A life spent being passed from man to man, bearing children, managing households, performing the duties expected of a Roman matron. And this was the daughter of one of Rome's greatest men. A woman of the highest social class, with a father who loved her and had the power to protect her at least somewhat. If her life was that constrained and difficult, imagine what it was like for women with less privilege. And this brings us to an important point. Class matters in this story. Everything I've been describing is about freeborn Roman citizens. But Rome had slaves. Lots of slaves. And for slave girls, the wedding night terror was just one terror among many. Slave girls could be raped at will by their masters. There was no ritual pretense about it. No flowers, no poetry, no religious sanction. Just raw power. A master could do what he wanted with his female slaves, and it wasn't even considered a crime. It was considered using your property. Some masters would breed their slaves like livestock, pairing them up to produce children who would be born into slavery. Some would keep slave concubines, girls and women forced to provide sexual services alongside their other labor. And sometimes a master would free a slave woman and marry her. This did happen. Augustus's advisor Maecenas married a freedwoman. So did various other prominent Romans. But freedom and marriage didn't erase what had been done to these women when they were still enslaved. Didn't erase the rapes, the forced pregnancies, the years of having no control over their own bodies. So when we talk about the ritual of the wedding night, we have to remember, for slave women, there was no wedding night. There was just night after night of vulnerability and violation. The ritual was at least acknowledged for freeborn women, even if it was cloaked in euphemism. For slaves, there wasn't even that. Just silence. Let me bring this back to the ritual itself, because I want you to understand how carefully constructed all of this was. Every detail of the Roman wedding ceremony was designed to accomplish something. The abduction from the mother's arms. It reenacted the founding myth of Rome, the rape of the Sabine women. It said, "This violence is sacred, it's how Rome began." The knot of Hercules holding the bride's tunic together. Only the husband could untie it, and Hercules was a symbol of strength and fertility. The message: the husband has the strength to take what's his. The flame-colored veil hiding the bride's face. She's a sacrifice approaching the altar. The fire and water presented at the threshold. She's accepting her new life, her new subordination. Every single element reinforced the same message: you belong to him now. Your body, your will, your future. You have no choice. This is the natural order. The gods command it. Rome requires it. And any resistance is futile. It's not even conceivable. But here's what I find most devastating about all of this. The Romans convinced these girls that this was good for them. That this was what they should want. From the time a girl was born, she was raised to believe that marriage and motherhood were her highest purpose. That serving her husband was virtue. That obedience was beauty. That suffering in silence was strength. They told these girls that the wedding night was the beginning of their real lives. That everything before was just preparation. And the girls believed it because what else could they believe? Every woman they knew had gone through the same thing. Their mothers, grandmothers, aunts, neighbors. And those women told them, this is how it is. This is how it's always been. You'll get through it. You'll adjust. And maybe they did adjust. Maybe the human capacity for adaptation is so strong that you can adjust to almost anything given enough time and no alternative. Maybe some of these marriages became partnerships. Maybe some husbands were kind. Maybe some women found satisfaction in motherhood and household management. Maybe some even found pleasure in the marriage bed eventually. But maybe doesn't erase the violation of that first night. Maybe doesn't change the fact that consent was never part of the equation. Maybe doesn't make it okay that an entire civilization built its foundation on the subjugation of half its population. And that's what we're really talking about here. Not just the wedding night. Not just individual acts of violence disguised as ritual. We're talking about a system. A civilization-scale system that commodified women's bodies, that treated reproduction as a state interest, that gave men absolute power over their wives and daughters, and that called all of this natural, necessary, and good. Rome isn't unique in this. But Rome is instructive because we have such detailed records. Because Rome has been held up for centuries as this pinnacle of civilization. We teach Roman law in law schools. We base our government structures on Roman models. We quote Roman philosophers. We admire Roman engineering. And all of that is true. Rome did accomplish remarkable things. But they accomplished them on the backs of slaves. They built them on the bodies of women. They funded them with conquest and exploitation. And when we tell the story of Rome without acknowledging that, we're participating in the same silence that Rome imposed on its women. We're letting the ritual stay hidden. But it doesn't stay completely hidden, does it? Because women remember. Not the individual women of ancient Rome, they're long gone. But women as a class, women as a collective, carry these memories in their bodies somehow. There's a reason why even now, in our supposedly enlightened modern age, women are afraid of their wedding nights. Not all women, not in the same way, but the echo is there. The nervousness, the anxiety, the cultural jokes about innocent brides and experienced grooms. We've dressed it up differently. We've changed the laws. We've added consent to the equation, at least in theory. But that old template is still there, lurking in the background. The idea that sex is something men do to women. That women submit. That it might hurt but that's just how it is. And when women speak up about sexual violence, about marital rape, about being coerced or forced, there's always someone ready to silence them. To say they're exaggerating. To say it couldn't have been that bad. To say, well, he's your husband, what did you expect? That's the ghost of Rome talking. That's the echo of ancient ritual that said a husband's rights superseded a wife's autonomy. We like to think we've moved past all that. We like to think that the marriage equality we've achieved, the right to divorce, to own property, to refuse sex even within marriage, means we've solved the problem. But legal rights don't erase cultural memory. Legal changes don't automatically transform the way people think about power and bodies and gender. And as long as we refuse to look directly at where we came from, as long as we sanitize the history and pretend Rome was all marble statues and noble orators, we can't fully understand where we are now. So let's sit with the uncomfortable truth for a moment. Let's not look away. Young girls, some barely into puberty, were legally married to adult men. On their wedding nights, they were subjected to sexual intercourse whether they wanted it or not. They had no legal recourse, no cultural support for refusal. They were expected to endure pain and fear in silence. They were expected to be grateful for the privilege of serving their husbands and bearing their children. This was celebrated. This was ritualized. This was called holy. Rome did this for hundreds of years. Thousands of girls. Tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. Each one an individual person with thoughts and feelings and fears. Each one reduced to a body, a vessel, a tool for reproduction and alliance building. And we don't know their names. That's important. We don't know their names because Rome didn't think their individual identities mattered enough to record. They were Lucia, daughter of Marcus, or Julia, wife of Gaius, identified always in relation to the men who owned them, first their fathers, then their husbands. Even their graves often just say things like, "Here lies a good wife who caused no trouble." The reduction of an entire life to compliance and silence. Now, I can hear the objection some of you might be raising, but this was 2,000 years ago. Why does it matter now? We can't change what happened. And you're right, we can't change it, but we can acknowledge it. We can bear witness to it. We can speak the names of the nameless, even if those names are fictional, like Lucia, and say, "This happened to you. You mattered, your pain mattered, your fear mattered," and we can trace the lines from there to here. We can see how the same underlying assumptions about male authority and female subordination have persisted, shape-shifted, adapted to new legal and social contexts but never fully disappeared. Let me give you an example. In the United States, marital rape wasn't fully criminalized in all 50 states until 1993. 1993. That's not ancient history. That's within the lifetime of many people watching this. The legal principle that a husband had sexual rights over his wife, that once you said, "I do," you'd given permanent consent, that principle descended directly from Roman law. It traveled from Rome to medieval Europe to British common law to American law. For thousands of years, the legal systems of the Western world operated on the assumption established in Rome: wives cannot refuse their husbands. It took sustained feminist activism, cultural change, and decades of legal challenges to change that. And even now, marital rape is under-prosecuted, underreported, and often not taken seriously by law enforcement. Because the cultural assumption runs deeper than the law. The cultural assumption says, what happens between a husband and wife is private. It's not our business. It's not really rape if they're married. That's the ritual still operating. The silence still imposed. And it's not just about marital rape. It's about the whole complex of ideas about women's bodies as communal property. The idea that fathers should control their daughters' sexuality. That male family members have the right to enforce their female relatives' purity. Honor killings, forced marriages, FGM. These practices exist in various cultures around the world, and while they're not directly descended from Roman practice, they spring from the same underlying principle, that women's bodies are tools for maintaining family honor and producing legitimate heirs, not autonomous beings belonging to themselves. Let me tell you about a practice that connects directly back to Rome. The virginity test. In various countries today, girls are still subjected to medical examinations to prove they're virgins before marriage. Doctors check for an intact hymen, just like the Romans examined the wedding sheets for blood. And just like in Rome, this is terrible science. Hymens can be torn through non-sexual activity. Some girls are born without much of a hymen at all. Not all first sexual encounters produce bleeding. But the cultural obsession with proof of virginity persists. Why? Because just like in Rome, a bride's virginity is seen as property that must be verified before the transaction of marriage is completed. She's not a person with a history and a self. She's a commodity whose value is determined by whether or not another man has used her. This is the long shadow of the ritual. This is how ideas from 2,000 years ago still shape lives today. And it's not just in distant countries or conservative cultures. It's everywhere, including in the modern West, just more subtle. The idea that women who dress a certain way are asking for it. The idea that women should be modest, careful, protective of their virtue. The idea that a woman's sexual history matters more than a man's. The idea that fathers walk daughters down the aisle and give them away to their husbands. These are all echoes, all remnants, all threads connecting back to that wedding night in Rome. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying that every Roman man was a brutal rapist. I'm not saying that every Roman marriage was loveless and violent. Individual experiences varied, just like they do now. Some men were kind to their wives. Some couples developed genuine affection. Some women found ways to exercise power and influence within the constraints of their system. But individual variation doesn't negate systemic oppression. The fact that some enslaved people were treated well by their masters doesn't make slavery okay. The fact that some Roman wives were happy doesn't make the legal and cultural framework that gave husbands absolute power over wives okay. We have to be able to look at systems critically while acknowledging individual humanity. And the system, the ritual, the structure, the whole apparatus that Rome built around marriage and women's sexuality, that system was oppressive. That system was violent. That system normalized and sanctified what we would now recognize as rape. So why did Rome go to such lengths to hide this in plain sight? Why the elaborate rituals, the religious sanctification, the poetry and flowers and celebration? Because that's how power maintains itself. Naked force is unstable. If you rule purely through violence and terror, eventually people rebel. But if you can make people believe that the violence is natural, necessary, even sacred, then they'll enforce it themselves. They'll internalize it. The oppressed will collaborate in their own oppression, and the oppressors won't even need to feel guilty because they're just following the rules, observing the traditions, doing what the gods require. The ritual surrounding the Roman wedding night accomplished this perfectly. It took what was fundamentally a violent assertion of male power and wrapped it in so many layers of tradition and meaning that it became almost invisible. The violence disappeared into the ceremony. And because everyone participated in the ceremony, the parents, the priests, the guests, the community, everyone became complicit. Everyone was invested in maintaining the fiction that this was beautiful and good. This is how patriarchy works, by the way. Not through conscious conspiracy but through countless individuals all performing their assigned roles, all participating in rituals that normalize male dominance and female subordination, all passing on the same lessons to the next generation. The mothers teaching their daughters to submit. The fathers teaching their sons to command. The priests blessing the hierarchy. The poets celebrating it. The lawmakers codifying it. Each person just doing their part, and together they create a system so pervasive that it seems like nature itself. But it's not nature. It's culture. It's choice. It's a structure built by human decisions and maintained by human action. And that means it can be changed by human decisions and human action. And it has been changing. Slowly. Painfully slowly. But the arc is there. Women gained the right to own property. To divorce. To refuse sex. To vote. To work. To control their own fertility. Each of these rights was fought for by women who could see the system clearly, who refused to accept that this was just how things had to be. Each right was opposed by people who claimed it would destroy civilization, undermine the family, anger the gods. But civilization didn't collapse when women got rights. Families didn't disappear. The gods, if they exist, seem fine with it. What did change was the power structure. And that's what was really being defended all along. Not tradition. Not nature. Not divine order. Just power. The power of men over women. The power of husbands over wives. The power of fathers over daughters. And that power, for all its supposed naturalness and inevitability, turned out to be surprisingly fragile once women were allowed to challenge it. But here's what worries me. Here's what keeps me up at night thinking about all of this. The changes we've won, legal equality, reproductive rights, protection from marital rape, they're not permanent. They're not guaranteed. They're the result of specific legal decisions and cultural shifts that can be reversed. And in various parts of the world right now, there are movements working to reverse them. Movements that want to return to traditional values. Movements that talk nostalgically about a time when men were men and women knew their place. When families were strong and divorce was rare and society was stable. They never seemed to mention that women couldn't refuse sex in those traditional families. That wives had no legal recourse against abusive husbands. That divorce was rare because women had no economic options and no legal rights. That society was stable because half the population was forcibly subdued. They present it as a golden age. They present it as natural law. They present it as what God wants. But it's just the old Roman ritual dressed up in new clothes. It's the same impulse to control women's bodies and sexuality. The same insistence that male authority is necessary for social order. The same willingness to sacrifice women's autonomy for the benefit of the patriarchal structure. And when I see young girls today being married off in some countries, when I see legal systems that still don't fully recognize marital rape, when I see cultural practices that prioritize family honor over women's safety, when I see politicians arguing that women shouldn't have the right to control their own reproduction, I see Rome. I see that wedding night. I see that girl lying in the dark, terrified, with no way out and no one to help her, being told that this is good for her. This is her purpose. This is what she should want. And I think, we have to remember. We have to bear witness. We have to keep telling this story, uncomfortable as it is, because the alternative is forgetting. And forgetting lets the ritual return. Forgetting lets people claim that traditional marriage was beautiful and pure and good, unmarred by violence or coercion. Forgetting erases the voices of the Lucias of history, all the nameless girls who suffered in silence because they had no choice. So remember Lucia. Remember her fear, remember her pain, remember her voicelessness, and then use your voice. Use your power, use your agency, all the things she never had, to create a world where no one ever has to go through what she went through. That's the lesson, that's the call, that's the responsibility that comes with knowledge. Now you know, now you've seen, now you understand. What will you do with that understanding? How will you answer the call? The choice is yours. Make it count.